Imagine a massive power grid, or a high-end data center running at exactly 100% capacity. It looks perfect. There's no smoke, no grinding gears, and no warning lights. It's eerily quiet. But that's the problem. When a system is pushed to its absolute limit with zero breathing room, it's not efficient. It's volatile. This is the most dangerous state a system can be in. And here's the part nobody tells you. Most American households are built the exact same way. I'm not talking about people who are broke or drowning in debt. I'm talking about the successful ones. The families with the nice SUV, the suburban mortgage, and the steady career. On the surface, everything is fine. But underneath, there's this constant low-level humming of stress. You know the feeling. There's never a month where you can just breathe. Every dollar is spoken for before the paycheck even hits the bank. Your calendar is a Tetris board of commitments. Everything works, but it only works as long as nothing goes wrong. A flat tire, a broken tooth, or a 2-day flu isn't just an inconvenience anymore. It's a crisis that threatens to pull them whole thread, and then it hits you. You're not struggling because something is wrong. You're struggling because everything has to go exactly right. This is what I call the fragility illusion. We've confused a high standard of living with actual stability. We think because we have the things, we have the security. But feeling safe isn't the same thing as being able to take a hit. The trap isn't that you don't make enough money, and it's not that you're bad at math. The problem is you've built a life with no room for error. You've optimized for a world where mistakes don't happen. But that's not how reality works. Your life doesn't fail slowly, piece by piece. When a system is this tight, it fails all at once. My name is Mark, and I spend an unhealthy amount of time studying why households that look successful on paper feel permanently one mistake away from collapse. I've obsessed over the math behind why we feel so trapped despite doing everything right. Today we're not going to talk about budgeting tips or passive income. We're going to break down how this illusion was built in the first place and how to redesign it. Life that doesn't require perfection just to survive. Section 1. What you're actually running. Most people wake up thinking they're just living their life. They see a series of choices, a few bills, and a job. But if you step back, that's not what's happening at all. What you're actually doing is running a high-output industrial plant. Think about it. Your income is the raw input. Your mortgage, the car payments, the insurance, and the subscriptions. That's the base load. It's the energy required just to keep the lights on before you even produce anything. Your time and your focus are the finite resources fueling the whole operation. And here's where things get uncomfortable. We spend all our time trying to increase the input. We think if we just get a 10% raise or a bigger bonus, the stress goes away. But the problem isn't the size of the input. The problem is that your system has lost its ability to absorb a shock. In engineering, they call this slack. In your life, we call it peace of mind. But in the modern American household, slack is seen as waste. If there's an extra $1,000, it gets committed to a new payment. If there's an extra hour, it gets booked for a lesson or a meeting, and then it hits you. A system doesn't collapse because it's busy. It collapses because it has no unused capacity. You've optimized yourself into a corner where you're too efficient to survive a bad day. Section 2. The success that requires perfection. I see this everywhere. Let's look at what we've been told success looks like. It's a dual income household. They live in a good zip code. They drive reliable cars. They aren't buying gold watches or flying private. They're just living a standard, upper middle class life. On paper, they've made it. But here's the part nobody tells you. That version of success is built on the assumption of perfection. The entire math of that lifestyle only works if both partners stay perfectly healthy, both jobs remain perfectly secure, the market stays perfectly stable. There is no bad month built into the design. There's no slow mode. If one person gets burned out and needs to quit, the system breaks. If a child needs extra care and someone has to stay home, the system breaks. We've built these lives that are incredibly impressive, but they are also incredibly intolerant. Most people aren't living a lifestyle that's expensive in the way we think. They aren't wasteful. They're living a lifestyle that is intolerant of reality. It's a delicate glass sculpture sitting on a vibrating table, and we're all just pretending the floor isn't shaking. Section 3. When stability is just momentary balance. We like to use the word stable to describe our lives. But I think what most of us actually have is something called momentary equilibrium. Think of a person balancing on a tightrope. In that exact second, they aren't falling. They look balanced. But that's not stability. That's a constant, exhausting struggle to counteract every tiny gust of wind. The moment they stop adjusting, the moment they get tired, they fall. That's how many American households are functioning. You feel fine only because you are constantly micro-adjusting. You're checking the bank app on Thursday to make sure the Friday mortgage payment clears. You're calculating exactly what time you have to leave the office to make the daycare pickup so you don't get hit with a late fee. You're not fine. You're just in a state of balance that exists only as long as no external force hits you. There's no room to absorb a mistake. If the car breaks down, you don't just lose money. You lose the rhythm that keeps the whole house standing. And that's why you never actually feel relaxed, even on vacation. You don't feel safe because safety was never built into the architecture of your life. It was just assumed. Section 4. The invisible cost of full utilization. When you run a system at 100% capacity for too long, you start paying taxes that don't show up on an IRS form. I call these the invisible costs of full utilization. First, there's the cognitive load. You are always calculating. Even when you're playing with your kids or watching a movie, a part of your brain is running the numbers, checking the calendar, and worrying about the what-ifs. Then, there's the decision fatigue. When you have no slack, every single decision becomes high stakes. Buying a new pair of shoes isn't just a purchase. It's a trade-off against the utility bill. When every choice has a massive consequence, your brain eventually just gives up. But the most dangerous one is recovery debt. In a life with no breathing room, there is no time to heal. If you get sick, you work through it. If you're grieving, you keep the camera on for the Zoom call. You can't afford to stop, so you just keep borrowing energy from your future self. Here's the part nobody tells you. Burnout isn't a failure of resilience. You aren't weak because you can't handle the pressure. Burnout is just the interest you pay on a life with no slack. It's the mechanical failure of a machine that was never allowed to idle. Section 5. Why more money doesn't fix it. Most people spend their entire lives chasing a number, thinking that once they hit a certain salary or get that next promotion, the pressure will finally lift. They think more money equals more margin. But here's the part nobody tells you. More income, by itself, almost never creates breathing room. In a system with no slack, your lifestyle automatically expands to absorb every new dollar. And it's not because you're greedy or buying Ferraris. It's because you're tired. You use the extra money to buy convenience. You pay for the premium delivery so you don't have to grocery shop. You pay for the lawn service because you're working on Saturdays. You buy a more reliable and expensive car because you literally cannot afford to be late to work. Your income doesn't create a buffer. It just becomes the fuel required to maintain the new, higher speed you're running at. You aren't getting further away from the edge. You're just standing on a higher cliff. And that's the trap. More income doesn't create margin. It just raises the floor you're not allowed to fall below. Section 6. The real failure mode. When a life built like this fails, it doesn't look like a slow, graceful descent. It's not like a car running out of gas where you slowly coast to a stop on the shoulder. Because everything is so tightly coupled, the failure is immediate. It starts with something small, a minor health issue, a shift in the company's leadership, or an unexpected repair. In a normal system, this would be a speed bump. In a system at 100% utilization, it's a catastrophic engine failure. And then it hits you. The panic. Not because of the event itself, but because you realize you have 0 moves left. There is no plan B, because plan A took up all the space. The worst part isn't the financial loss. It's the shame. You look at your successful life and wonder how it could be so fragile. You feel like a failure. You think you should have worked harder or been more disciplined. But you need to hear this. The collapse feels personal, But the design flaw was always structural. You didn't fail because you weren't good enough. You failed because you were living in a system that required you to be perfect just to stay level. Section 7. What you're actually craving. When you're in the middle of this, it's easy to think the answer is just more. More money, more optimization, a better productivity app. But that's just trying to run the machine faster. What you're actually craving isn't wealth. It's optionality. Optionality is the ability to absorb a massive change without your entire world collapsing. It's the invisible buffer that says you can handle a no or a not right now. It's the realization that you don't have to stay in that toxic role just because the mortgage is due on the 1st. Most people spend their lives building a cage out of gold bars. They have the stuff, but they've lost the power to change direction. Real freedom isn't about what you can afford to buy. It's about what you can afford to stop doing. It's the power to say, I'm not doing this anymore, and knowing the lights will stay on. Until you have that, you aren't successful. You're just a very well-paid prisoner of your own high-performance system. Section 8. Designing for reality. I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting you give up your ambitions. I'm not saying you should move into a van and stop caring about the future. This isn't about doing less. It's about designing differently. Most of us have spent years designing for the perfect day. We've built our lives around the assumption that we'll always be motivated, always be healthy, and the economy will always be kind. But that's a fantasy. Designing for reality means building a system that assumes you'll have a bad year. It means prioritizing the invisible milestones, those moments where your money starts generating enough of its own momentum that your earned income isn't the only thing keeping the engine turning. It's about moving from a life of high-performance fragility to one of quiet, boring stability. Because at the end of the day, a life that only works when everything goes right isn't a successful life. It's a fragile one. And once you see the cracks in the design, you can't unsee them. The only question left is, how much longer are you willing to keep the machine running at? 100%. Before we wrap this up, I want to say one thing. If you've felt this pressure, please stop blaming yourself. You didn't fail. You weren't lazy or irresponsible. In fact, you probably worked harder than most just to keep the plate spinning this long. The truth is, you simply built a life on defaults that were never designed for reality. You followed the script we were all given, the one that measures success by how much you can handle, rather than how much you can survive. We've been taught to prize efficiency above all else, but a strong life isn't efficient. It's resilient. Real success isn't about running at maximum output every single day. It's about how much margin you have left over when the world throws a punch. I want you to take a second and look at your own system. If one major resource disappeared tomorrow, just one, what would be the first thing to collapse? You don't need to fix it this second. You just need to realize that the gap between where you are and where it breaks is smaller than you thought. Redesigning your life doesn't mean you're giving up on your ambitions. It actually means you're finally taking them seriously enough to give them a foundation that lasts. Creating margin isn't wasting money or time. It's buying back the right to choose what happens next. It's moving from a life of constant maintenance to a life of actual control. If this resonated with you, share it with the person you're building a life with. Not to point fingers or talk about what's wrong, but to start a different conversation about what right actually looks like for your future. Life will never be perfect. The goal isn't to wait for a world where nothing goes wrong. The goal is to build something that doesn't break when it isn't. My name is Mark. Thanks for thinking with me.